Hello and welcome back to part 1 of the guide, Setting OBS Up. First things first, you're going to hear that the voice sounds a bit different right now. That's because I don't have any filters set up. So right now it's just a pure microphone input. We're going to talk about filters in probably the next guide to get that set up first. But here is what you see when you first launch OBS. If you already closed this, you can find the auto configuration wizard under tools, though in most cases you don't really need it. We're still gonna set it up to see if it reports any errors. So in this case, we're just gonna optimize for streaming. And then we already get up to our first choice, resolution and frame rate. Resolution, we'll get into it in a bit more detail when we talk about compression and the like. But in most cases, you want to use 1080. If you have a smaller or larger screen, for example, I have a 2K screen in here, you can select that as your resolution. But in one of the next guides, I'm going to show you why that's a bad idea. Twitch limits your bandwidth, to make it simple. And if you pump out a high resolution, you're going to get a shit image, period. So we're going to go with 1920 by 1080. If you have a weaker PC, you might want to consider 720, but like I said, we'll talk about that when we get to the settings. For the FPS, I highly suggest 60. And in most cases, this should not cause any issues, but will cause a very nice and fluid image when you stream. Then we get to the second part, connecting your service. And in this case, I'm just going to talk about Twitch. YouTube and co work a little bit different, but since the bandwidth and stuff is limited by Twitch, it's important that we talk about that provider. You could use your stream key. If you use your stream key, however, you get limited access. I highly suggest to instead connect the account. What this will do is it will lock you into your Twitch account through a browser. You will get your two-factor authentication, and then you just have to confirm it. But this will give you additional features in OBS. There we go. Worked the second time around. So I'm going to log in and be right back. There we go. The two-factor authentication has been confirmed, and we are now connected. Next thing, although we're also going through this later, is we do prefer hardware encoding. Now we're going to run a bandwidth test. This usually gives you good results, but let's see. And there we go. It is all set up. So first things first, you can see that it actually suggests a video bitrate of 6000, but an output resolution of 720. I don't think that is necessary, but I'll show you briefly why. Now, one thing you see is that as soon as you connect, it will also open up these additional windows, and these come from your Twitch integration. What you can do with them is first I'm going to maximize the window, and then I'm just going to move them to specific corners where I want to read them. And actually, let's move that one over here for now. I usually have OBS on a 2K screen, so I can easily see stuff like volume controls and chat, but we're gonna set all of that up bit by bit. And since we've all used Windows applications before, I'm not gonna go into detail of all the settings here, but I will address a few settings that I highly suggest, including the confirmation dialogues when starting and stopping streams, and to automatically record when streaming. If you, for example, want to upload a VOD, you should always enable this because the VODs kept by Twitch are not very high quality, and this will make sure that your OBS keeps a better quality of your VOD for an upload later on. Then you have a few additional settings. For example, if you prefer alignment snapping, I generally don't, because I just set my mouse to a very low DPI and use it manually. Same here, do you want it to minimize to system tray? All of these settings are well known, I don't have to go through them in detail. The important ones are in here, where we get to the stream and the output. If you are close to a specific location, you do want to use a specific server. However, in most cases, for example, in my case, I live in Denver, so it makes sense that I select the Denver server. However, if you ever experience any issues, say that server is down, it is always smart to just leave it on auto. That will always select the best server in that moment. You also have a bandwidth test mode. This is a really nice feature if you want to make sure your stream is set up, but you don't want to be seen. Because if this is enabled, it would stream your data to Twitch, but Twitch will not set you live, so no one can see you, including yourself. However, if this is enabled, no one can see you, so make sure you remember if you enabled this. If you use Franker Faces or Better TTV, you can also enable that here. That will make sure they appear in your chat. If you don't know what it is, we'll get to it later. Then output. I'm going to generally leave it in simple mode because the advanced settings contain a few things we don't need unless we want to get really professional. First thing to talk about is the video bit rate. Twitch, for non-partners, allows 6,000 kilobits or 6 megabits. This means how much bandwidth it allows you to stream to it. If I set this, for example, to 10 megabits, what would happen is that Twitch would cut me off and it would have a horrible quality. If I go down, this would be beneficial if, for example, I have a very slow internet connection and my upload isn't very stable, but it will greatly affect your quality. And I will have a guide after this that gives you a few examples on how this looks and what settings are suggested. I usually suggest 6,000 for the video bitrate, and you can leave it at 160, or you can go up a bit, up to 320 for the audio bitrate. Though in all fairness, you probably don't notice anything above 192. For the video encoding, very, very important, if this is set to software, you will torture your system. It means that the video will be encoded by your CPU, and your CPU is not good at this. Always select the hardware option, and in most cases, this is either going to be H.264 or a newer standard. If you have a newer standard, pick it. There are some really nice ones, but we'll also make a dedicated video about these encoders because it goes rather deep and there are a few interesting alternative options. However, just to get you live, select hardware. You can select a higher quality if you are okay with more performance being taken away. In most cases, this is perfectly fine. The H.264 codec has been around for nearly 2 decades, so if your PC can't handle that on the video card, then something is wrong. Then maybe you should upgrade before you stream, or at least stream older software only, because you will probably encounter issues. For the audio encoder, unless you have any different options, AAC is perfect. And then last but not least, you want to designate it a spot where you save your recordings if you keep VODs. I'm just going to switch that for me real quick. In my case, I have created a folder on my D drive and just called it Stream. This folder will contain all the data I need, my avatars, my sounds, and my whole OBS setup, plus additional programs. So if I ever reinstall my PC, this is the folder that needs to be saved. I would not suggest to keep this folder online or on a server, because you will probably run into performance or connection issues. So make sure it's on a local drive. I set my recordings to this folder. Recording quality, I'm actually going to change to high quality medium file size. This makes sure that the video recorded is of the highest possible quality. And I really like the Matroska videos because good quality, low performance hit. What I usually do is I usually cut my videos after to remove the intro and remove the outro, say if I forgot to stop the recording. But in most cases, you can pretty much upload this file as is, especially if you don't want to spend a lot of effort. And in case of the video encoder, we have a bunch of options. Software you should never pick. This will always hurt you more than it should. In this case, because I have an AMD GPU, I have two options. I have H264 and HEVC. This is also called H265. So if you need any indication of which to pick, in this case it would be HEVC. But if you're not sure, feel free to just post a note in the Discord and we're more than happy to look into this. You can see that my live stream doesn't offer that option, and that can differ based on cards. But in general, HEVC is a smaller file size for higher quality. With this done, we can move to audio. If you have a different sample rate, 48 kilohertz is perfect. Humans can't really hear much above that, and the compression in the stream would eat it anyway. But other than that, there is nothing we really need to change here, but there is something we need to change here. When selecting the video output, this is really important because this is your canvas. So this would indicate how big this screen is. How big is the screen I can work with? Whereas this is the output that is sent to Twitch. Since we're running at 6 megabit, there's absolutely no reason to not stream 1080. If you lower, say to 3.5 megabits for whatever reason, it might be worth lowering it to 720, but in most cases, I would suggest leaving it at 1080 and 60 FPS. Last but not least, you see a whole bunch of shortcuts that you can set, for example, for stuff like muting. I generally suggest to set these up using SAMI, since it's a bit more interactive and you can, for example, use a Stream Deck to control them or an external device. But we will also get to that. And last but not least, if you experience any issues, I would suggest raising the process priority. That essentially makes sure that OBS is always the first one that gets performance, but in most cases you should be fine leaving all of this in default. One detail you see here is the HDR. To my knowledge, I don't know if that has since changed, HDR streaming is still causing a huge issue. You will have a very bland and boring image if you do this. It looks like color is missing, and I've never seen it really work. I would in general suggest to turn HDR off on the monitor that you stream. This will give you a much better image and much better color, especially for people who don't watch you in HDR. But that is pretty much all the settings we needed to set here. So now we have our default OBS setup. But we're still far away from going live. So let's talk about scenes.